Okay, all right, let's begin. So thank you to every single person here for joining us. My name is Khatija Zahid, and I will be moderating today's event. This is the first webinar in our Awam Ki Awaz series, and it's also the first webinar of the 2024 Get Out the Vote campaign. This is the third iteration of the 2024 Go TV initiative, and we're quite excited to launch it with you today. So a bit about this series, we plan to highlight how significant Pakistani voices are for our democracy, particularly in government as public servants, which brings me to my next point. We are joined today by really remarkable people, our guest panelists. We have Sumbul Siddiqui, hello, and we also have Osman Salahuddin and Umar Ahmed. We also have the APF's board chair, Dr. Qureshi. We have a board member, Hassan Said, and GoTV's program manager, Misal Irfan, who is also our host today. Also, we have the Director of Operations present, Henry Alfine. Thank you, everybody. I would like to take a minute and provide a very brief overview. We are first going to hear from Dr. Qureshi. He's going to tell us a bit about APF, and then we are going to hear from our guest panelists and eventually open the floor for questions. We will then conclude with a brief discussion on GoTV's voting work. Before I turn it over to Dr. Qureshi, I would like to set some ground rules. If you have questions during the webinar, feel free to send them, and please specify which panelist it's for, and please ensure that you are asking in the Q&A box specifically. And if you would like to ask the panelists directly, please wait for the Q&A portion and raise your hand and proceed accordingly. Now, Dr. Qureshi, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thank you, Khadija, and welcome everyone to this wonderful webinar. As a background, the American-Pakistan Foundation was formed in 2009 by some of our leading community members with the idea of promoting relationships between Pakistan and the United States. And it was probably the first 501c3 which took that platform and worked on it now for a good 15 years with the mission of empowering the Pakistani-American community and fostering relationships between Pakistan and the United States. One of our leading initiatives and a realization happened in 2019, which was formation of the Leadership Council. The realization that the American-Pakistan Foundation should be working on empowering our younger generations, which is a group of amazing individuals that actually started gaining steam around 2020. However, COVID, like everything else, slowed down the progress of the Leadership Council, which now has come back with a vengeance and doing an amazing job, and also are the fuel pump for a lot of initiatives of APF, which include our fellowship program, which the United Nations initiative, Rising Stars, where we recognize outstanding Pakistani origin females. We have the mentorship platform, and of course, Get Out the Vote campaign, or as we like to call it, the GOTV program, which really works towards making the Pakistani community embedded in a non-partisan manner into the electoral process, and their voices be heard. And this is what we're doing today. We have in the past, and this is the first of the series, invited some amazing individuals who have worked in public service, who have gone through the electoral process in the United States, who are our current and future leaders. And that brings us to this current webinar. And I am so looking forward to hearing from these three wonderful individuals. And I'm glad that we have Councillor Siddiqui, also Salahuddin, and we have Umar Ahmed here. And I'm sure Khatija and Misal would be introducing them, and we'll hear some fascinating conversation with them. Before I hand it over to Misal, I believe, Khatija, I just want to emphatically say the amazing job that the Get Out the Vote campaign members have done this year under the leadership of Misal. And I think we will have an impactful presence this year in the election process. Thank you so much, Khatija. Over to you, Misal.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your amazing remarks and also the kind words. I appreciate it. I think, Dr. Qureshi has kind of brought up a point that's sort of essential to our work is we are an organization that is doing something that's one of a kind, right? We're not only empowering Pakistani-Americans, but ensuring we build this connection between the United States and Pakistan. And so we're excited that this initiative can sort of be a step in that process. Due to Dr. Qureshi's leadership and the team he's built alongside Henry, the Director of Operations at APF, the GOTV Get Out the Vote 2024 program has been able to set really ambitious goals. Through this program, we're running a pledge to vote, which we'll share later, which essentially is an online pledge that we're having our community sign in an effort to show the number of Pakistani Americans that are interested in voting and have, this energy for civic engagement. We're also concurrently running webinars like this one, a social media campaign, and writing a research report that essentially will demonstrate the different ways we engage in the civic engagement process, whether it's voting, whether it's canvassing, whether it's advocacy for certain issues. So we're super excited with what we're doing this year. And, every single year, it seems like this is the most important election. This is, the one that will have a huge impact. I think what we're trying to sort of realize is every single election is very essential, whether it's local, national. And so the work that we're doing here is to really build a base for our community to regularly get involved and normalize our involvement in this very, very essential process. Now, I'm super excited because this webinar actually acts as sort of a launch of our GOTV 2024 campaign. And with that, I would like to introduce our incredible speakers that we have here today. We are joined by Sumbul Siddiqui. She is serving her 4th term on the Cambridge City Council and previously served 2 terms as the mayor of Cambridge. She is the first Muslim mayor in Massachusetts and the first female mayor to serve 2 consecutive terms in Cambridge. We have Osman Salahuddin, who was elected as a city council member in January of 2024 in Redmond, Washington, and serves over 76,000 residents. He's also the communications and community engagement manager for King County Council Member Sarah Perry. We're also joined by a friend of mine, Umar Ahmed. He is the Director of External Affairs at the Illinois State House, District 5, with State Representative Kim DuBuclet. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Is that right?
DuBuclet.
Okay, thank you. And has built expertise in political advocacy, research, and managing field organizing efforts. So we're so excited to have a super talented group, but a really diverse group of participants, which I feel will provide a really unique perspective of what it's like to be Pakistani Americans in public service. Again, I want to thank you all for joining us for today's conversation, and want to emphasize, participants, as you are watching and you have any questions that come up, please feel free to submit them in the Q&A section. Your stories are not only inspiring, but can teach us a lot about the need for representation in local and state government, which I feel can often be overlooked. And so we're excited to see, what successes you've had in this experiences, but also the challenges you've faced along the way. On that note, I'd like to start off with, 2 broader questions for all 3 of our panelists, and, I'll let whoever feels most passionate to begin start. But the first question is, what has helped you get to where you are now, and what advice do you have for others who are interested in pursuing a career in public service? So I'll let whoever wants to take a jab go at it first.
I can jump in. Hello, everyone. My name is Osman Salahuddin. I'm a city council member in the city of Redmond, which if people know one thing about Redmond, it's the home of Microsoft. So we have a city population of 76,000, a little more than that now. And I think during the daytime, it's double that with Microsoft employees. So, this is a really, really great question on what's helped me get to where I am, because I'm only 28 years old, one of the youngest elected officials in the entire state. I'm honored to have the privilege to be able to do this. And so what I would say is what's helped me get here is honestly the sacrifices that my parents made they immigrated from Pakistan. They came to the greater Seattle area, and they, sacrificed a lot for their kids, their family. My mom is a preschool teacher. My dad is a small business owner. And, they've taught me a lot about service. And I've been fortunate, maybe not a lot of our community can say they've had the flexibility to have their parents let them do whatever they want in terms of, career choice. But they really pushed me to pursue all different types of career paths and fields. And that was really a blessing. And so what I would give advice for anyone who's interested in public service is really diversify what you're trying to explore, trying to study, trying to do in your career, because there's no correct pathway to start. I myself went to University of Washington to study neuroscience. So I was on the path to medical school and, pivoted out of medicine, out of the private healthcare industry into politics. And so now I work as a part-time council member and in full-time for the county government. But, I've been really blessed about the opportunities that have been provided by my community, and specifically, want to shout out my parents there.
For sure. Councillor Siddiqui, Umar, would love to hear your experiences as well.
Sure. Very similar. I think my parents played a big role for me too. Yeah, I was born in Karachi, and they really came to the States for a better life. But as we know, that can look like a lot of different things, this American dream. For my parents, they really struggled and kind of put all their energy into my brother and myself, my twin brother. They're still in their 70s, and they're still working. My dad's a shipping clerk, and my mom's a cashier at a grocery store. And I think what stood out to me is the role Cambridge has played in kind of my upbringing and the resources that I benefited from, specifically affordable housing to various programs. And I think because of that, and also my involvement as a high schooler in kind of local government, and a group of us, we started a youth council. And that youth council now is also in its 22nd year. And so that work that I got involved in because of adult supporters and got to go to City Hall, learn about what our local government was doing at an early age, really shaped kind of the trajectory of where I am today. I ended up going to law school and becoming a legal aid attorney because of wanting to, help people and work on policy that made a difference in people's lives because of the different policies that had really shaped my life. I wanted to make sure that we, as a city, in a state and a community, were keeping our eyes on that. And I ran for office really because I wanted to combine that interest in working one-on-one individually with people and helping them solve their problems, and also that broader policy work. And I feel like elected office has combined that desire. And so that was 2017 when I first ran. And I think it was based on really my lived life experience, kind of timing as well. I was one of the youngest people running as well. And I think really the advice I have for those who are interested in pursuing this career in public service is to say that it can look like a lot of different things. You don't necessarily have to run for office. You can get involved in your community, joining nonprofit boards, joining commissions, volunteering with a candidate. And I always urge individuals to think about, if they do want to run, what's motivating them and what they're driven by, and kind of their connection to the community, which I think is really important as well, and kind of their goals in public service as well. So yeah, thank you so much for having us here. It's great to be part of this panel too. So
Of course, no, thank you. And I think, you bring up a great point where identity is an essential part of all of this, right? It's what roots us, and our parents' experiences, of course, motivate us to sort of, as you said, like build a better life. That's sort of the classic line that is, while it is a short sentence, it carries so much more than that. But I think it's essential to sort of keep all of us rooted in that work as we sort of pursue these really difficult and challenging sort of policy efforts, whether it's, as councillor, as mayor. There's a bunch of challenges that I think being rooted in your community is essential to effectively doing that work. Omar, would love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think that the other two spoke on that really well, because similarly for me too, making sure that my parents' sacrifices, my grandparents' struggles when they first reached here, were not for nothing, making sure that the generations that are to come after us are going to have it even easier and have a quality of life that is conducive to the sacrifices that were made. But I also think that I couldn't have gotten to where I am today without a series of mentors that I had come across. Growing up in a state like Illinois, where there's just such complex governance, we have more layers than some other states around us too. We have municipalities, localities, townships, county, then state, then federal. So there's just so much there, and there's so much subject matter that one person can't cover it all. So for me, starting as early as in high school, I was interning on different campaigns. And then over time, that translated into state and federal legislative internships. And while those experiences were valuable, I think that at the heart of those were all the people that I was coming across. With campaigns, you have people that are traveling across the country on 3 to 4 month segments, with their own unique lived experiences and perspectives. The way the communities that they're working in have different stories to be told, but the work that needs to be done is just so collaborative that a lot of the wisdom they imparted onto me is something that I cherish and is just incredibly valuable in the pursuit of public service. And as far as advice is concerned, I think that we definitely need more passionate people from underrepresented backgrounds seeking out public office. In the state of Illinois, at least, growing up, I noticed that there wasn't that much representation, but we're starting to take strides in the right direction. So if somebody is interested, I would say make sure you're engaging with your community, going to different public forums, town halls, community events, but not just the formal stuff, making sure you're actually going to carnivals, festivals, food fest, all that stuff, because you can actually hear from your neighbors directly firsthand in a matter that they're willing to speak more freely, and that better equips you for when you're actually going to try to serve their needs. And then I guess I would also say that have no hesitation asking for coffee chats, asking questions, because in a field where you have to build these bridges and the work is so collaborative, more often than not, people are willing to give you that help and kind of give you a know-how of how you can get things done.
Amazing. You guys have done such a good job at answering this question that you actually hit my second question sort of right on the dot. So that was essentially getting a better sense of how your identity and community has helped you in this process. In an effort to maybe not sort of have you guys repeat what you've said, I will offer this question to whoever is interested. But yeah, would love to hear more specific kind of points on how have you sort of utilized your community, whether it's your community around where you live or community, maybe Pakistani-American community. Would love to hear how that's played a role, whether it's in your campaigns or within your work now.
Yeah, I'd love to share a little bit about that, where It's really the reason why I ran for city council is we have a city that's over 50% people of color, and over 37% is Asian American, a strong, Pakistani, Indian background. And we only had one city council member who was a person of color, and she was actually Pakistani as well. And she was one of my mentors, Omar. I appreciate you bringing that up, where, we didn't have the representation. And it's not even about, identity politics. I think it's really about, we didn't have people that were advocating for the voices who needed to be heard. We are a growing community. I know Illinois has been, there have been Pakistanis and there have been Muslims in Illinois and New York and, Houston, but Redmond and the greater Seattle area is just now growing and coming into its own with, especially with the tech industry. And so the community right now is ripe for folks to get involved. And that's honestly been very instrumental. I think I was able to, really leverage that community support in my campaign, and they helped me every step of the way. It also helps that my dad helped found the Pakistan Association of Greater Seattle when he moved here. So, that deeply rooted network was really valuable to me. But the involvement and the opportunity that I've had both in my full-time job and as a city council member, I really like to take that back to my identity, where just one example, when I believe, I think it was 2022, I was working on the King County Council office there, and the flood actually happened in Pakistan. And there was just no coverage, no awareness. And because of my background, because of the experiences that folks that I knew were going through, I was able to advocate for aid and support and actually take it to my boss. And we put forward a motion for just acknowledging that we need to route some resources in whatever capacity we can as a county, which is the 13th largest county in the country. So it had a lot of resources, a lot of availability there. And I was honored to just be able to look at my background and express that in a way that actually was helping people. So I'm very proud of my identity, and the community around me has been incredible.
I will echo that, definitely. I'll try not to repeat anything, but I think we're all going to have some similar answers. I think specifically when I think about my time in office and some of the work we've been able to do here, a lot of it comes from the community and identity. I think one example is the effort to bring halal food to school, to our Cambridge public schools. There were a group of Muslim parents who reached out to me after I was elected. I think this was my first term as mayor, or shortly before, and said, we have gone to the principal, we've gone to the teachers, our kids are coming home hungry. There's not a lot of options. Is there something that you can do? I was able to pull together kind of a few people and kind of explain what the families were looking for and what halal is. And it turned out that one of our vendors, who've, we pay millions of dollars to, has a halal meat option, right? Like they have that option. We just never asked. And so because of that, we were quickly able to pivot and ensure that all our public schools have halal option in their lunch menu. And so I think a lot of the work I've then been able to do as far as kind of the events as mayor, particularly hosting events, have also come from my identity. We've done this annual Bollywood night where we have local performers come and perform. We have henna, we have food. We've hosted, the first ever Diwali festival. We've had iftar every year that brings in about 1,000 people. Some of these events have never really happened in the city before. And so I think I really try to lift up the community. And Cambridge is about 120,000 people, and we don't, our Pakistani population is, the numbers aren't high, but we have a big Muslim population, a lot of individuals who are from Bangladesh, India, Somalia, and so I think that has been a really core part of my elected years in office, being that support and being there for this community in a variety of ways.
And then kind of just echoing the sentiments of both speakers as well. In the state of Illinois too, actually recently, we had introduced legislation for a halal kosher bill, which would have provide accommodations for people seeking out those dietary needs. And if we were to have introduced this bill, I want to say 5 years ago or 6 years ago, before we were able to expand the Asian American caucus, I don't necessarily know that it would have had the same force and support that we ended up seeing for it. And it was able to pass through both chambers, the Senate and the House. So definitely, I think identity is essential when it comes to making policy and passing policy. And to Usman's point about identity, I think that recently, especially, we've been seeing this co-option of identity and just having it drawn out into this culture war. But the bottom line is that there's just such sweeping consequences that take place with respect to it. When we go back to the early 2000s and we're looking at the foreign policy decisions of the United States and the direct impact that had on Pakistan, where much of our family resides, it's clear that we kind of, as Pakistani-Americans, have an obligation to be electing legislators that are working in the interest of us as Pakistani-Americans, and then also reflecting our values for the vision that we have for our homeland and for our family members abroad as well. One of the points that I think and it's a slightly corny one that people usually bring up about how you can't order at a table you don't have a seat at, but that really does have merits. It's really valuable and important that we are having our values reflected in that process. But yeah, just because I don't want to repeat a lot of the stuff that was said, I think I'll close off there.
No, 100%. And I think one essential part of all of this is that visibility is great, and it's something that we need to sort of enforce, but coupled with policy, right? And that's sort of, I think you've kind of summed that up perfectly, Umar, so I appreciate that. I guess my next question is pointed towards Councillor Siddiqui. So as mayor, you mentioned you guided impactful policy efforts through the disaster relief funding during COVID-19. You've worked to expand access to early childhood education, affordable housing, and halal options, which I'm sure we can all greatly appreciate, to Cambridge Public Schools and so much more. And so my first question would be, how did you work around the challenges of the pandemic and ensure you were still able to effectively continue serving your community?
Yeah, I'll say that it was very challenging, but we had a great team in the city to be navigating us through really some unprecedented times. And I think what I remember is there's not a lot of guidance coming from the federal government or even the state. And so I think a lot of city councils really had to be the face and make sure that there was effective communication around the challenges of the pandemic. And I, as mayor, also chaired the school committee, and so the school committee is a separate. The board is a separate elected group of us, about 7 of us, and I was chair. And I think that came with a lot of other challenges of just reopening schools and being involved in that. And I think what we really made sure of was how do we keep helping people day to day, and whether that's work around rental assistance, whether that was work around, we had started a Mayor's Disaster Relief Fund, which we raised over $5 million pretty quickly to give out to people, which then has kind of morphed into some of the guaranteed income work around cash and direct cash assistance that we've been doing in Cambridge that is providing monthly payments to families who are in poverty. And, I think my goal was to ensure that we were keeping kind of the constituents who are dealing with the most at the top of policy making, and making sure that there were effective tools that were available to families. I think there was really no how-to guide as far as leading through this pandemic, but I think we were really trying to rely on, we really had to rely on our community organizations. We had to rely on our partnerships with our schools, partnerships with various our universities. We have Harvard and MIT. We have to definitely partner with them. And we were one of the first cities to actually go back in person to school. We're one of the first cities to actually have testing be in place early on. But yeah, it was a challenging time. I'm like, I can't, sometimes I reflect on the 4 years and I'm like, it's so hard to, because it was so challenging. And there were really a lot of hard moments. And I think all you can do is keep the people in front, and make sure that you don't lose sight of what's happening on the ground. And being out in the community is really important. And so that was hard too during COVID, right? There's so many restrictions, so you had to really figure out different ways to do that. But that was something that I really wanted to keep at the forefront.
And I think the pandemic, on top of that, really highlighted to people that maybe are not as in tune with local politics how essential it really is. And it is an immediate response in situations like this. And so a huge part of why we wanted to talk with you all today is we often overlook this aspect of government, even though it actually probably affects us the most. And so I think you've answered that greatly, and it helps to sort of shape that framing that we want to sort of push forward in our campaign as well. I guess going off of that, I'd love to hear what were the most valuable lessons during your time as mayor, and how that's maybe shifted how you want to approach the role that you're currently in. Would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. I think, what I'll say is, as far as valuable lessons, I think what the pandemic showed us was that, I think, I use this example, like, we knew kids didn't have internet at home before the pandemic. We knew that they didn't have laptops. We said, go to the library, right? Like, we said, let's study that. And I think a really valuable lesson was, like, we don't need to spend that much time studying and saying we need to study to do X. We can literally just do it. And I think that has been, or we don't have to wait for years and years, right? And so I think that kind of building on kind of momentum, and I carry it in my role as a city councillor, of course, as I'm chair of the housing committee here. And so we're working on zoning, right? And exclusionary zoning, and have more options. And there's always going to be this sense of, okay, let's study this. We need a few years. And I think the other take on this is like, well, we're in a housing crisis as well. So we have to be thinking about short-term, long-term. And I think those are some of the lessons that, I think have really stayed with me. I think it was really also important to me to make sure that I was accessible as an elected official, and as someone who's from this community. I think a big part of my strength as a leader has been that ability to connect and understand the lived experiences of residents, because I grew up low income, so when I go into affordable housing in our city, particularly some of the affordable housing that I've grown up in, I think immediately people feel a sense of connection. And I think being present in the community in all different ways, I think my time as mayor really kind of cemented that. And I think even now, as a city councillor, I'm not as involved, but I still want to make sure that I'm present in the community and being a part of big events, big and small, whether I'm invited to someone's birthday party, to some of the, larger events that we have. And so, I think the lessons around listening and patience and problem solving, really keep continuing on as a counselor.
Amazing. Thank you so much. On that note, I guess would love to sort of transition over to the other council member on the call. Council Member Salahuddin, we'd love to sort of hear, you began your current role in public office quite recently in January of this year, after working in the private sector for a few years and having leadership roles, especially during your undergraduate degree. I guess first off, would just like to get a sense of what has your first experience in government been like? I mean, it has to have been a whirlwind, I'm sure, but would love to hear, because a lot of the work that you were doing to sort of build up your campaign was during COVID, which I'm sure being online is very different from being in person now. And so would love to hear, what has your experience been like so far?
Absolutely. Thank you for that question. And it's been an incredible journey. I've been in office for a little over 5 months now. But the biggest thing, honestly, that's been sticking out is it's a lot of reading. And the campaign was all, really fun meeting with people. And now in office, you really have to make sure you're doing the reading, making sure that you're getting the work done because, thousands of residences, well-being, livelihoods really depend on the decisions that are made for the future of the city. So you mentioned whirlwind. It's been like a lot of folks have shared this with me. It's like drinking water from a fire hose. It's all coming at you at one time. And I think, it's at the end of the day, really rewarding work. And you really get to know what's at the core of it all, what's really important to people. Affordable housing is an issue that comes over time and time again. And I'm very fortunate that, the previous leaders in Redmond had the forethought to, think about inclusionary zoning. So we have, things in place where we can achieve goals and targets to help our most, underserved populations. But then, when it's not housing, it's parks and trails, it's small business support, it's, roads and traffic and things that, folks are thinking about in their day-to-day lives. But then, someone comes and asks for a cricket pitch in Redmond. And I'm like, I'm all for that. And there's just so much opportunity at the local level. And a lot of it goes unnoticed and unheard by community members because, you think about federal politics and you even look at state politics, but then at the local level, there's just so much opportunity. And so, I've been really excited to have the opportunity to go to all of these events. And as a younger leader, one of my priorities has been to be an advocate for young leaders as well. So middle schoolers, high schoolers. I've had a lot of speaking opportunities at schools and really engaging youth because that's, the next generation, even younger than me, where we want to make sure that they're ready to be able to step up to run for office, to get involved with public service and politics. And, that's been a really critical part about, what I've been able to do in terms of events. But then, just the diversity of all that there is. There are birthday parties, but then you go from an Eid event to a holy event to a Cinco de Mayo event. It's just nonstop, and I love it. But actually, this is technically my first elected experience, but I was also elected as student body president at the University of Washington when I was in undergrad. And, the student population is 50,000, which is bigger than a lot of cities. And having the opportunity to advocate for student, rights and having the ability to go at the legislative, state, local levels and be able to, share what's important to students. One of the stories that encompasses why I'm actually involved in this work is I had the opportunity to go to the state legislature in 2018 and actually testify in a closed room on behalf of undocumented students to help them get access to a college-bound scholarship, which they had not had eligibility for before. And, at the end of session, it was passed and thousands of more students had the opportunity to, actually achieve their academic dreams. And so that just encapsulated what my year in office as student body president was and motivated me to do the work that I'm doing today.
Great. And I think that also goes to show that you don't you can find the skills and expertise needed to sort of get into this field in other places, whether it's in your university, as student body president, or in these kind of elected positions, or even in other roles that have no remote connection to policy, but can still really help you develop what it's like to build a community, what it's like to talk to people and really be a listener. So yeah, amazing to hear. I guess the next question sort of looks to sort of the process of actually getting to this role. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of us on this call, we're coming from having attended maybe campaign events or have ourselves donated to Pakistani-Americans or Muslim Americans that are running within our community, or anyone that's running in our community that we feel represents us and can do the work. Would love to hear, what was the process of creating and running your campaign and field organizing within your community? Now, I see that you have a connection within your family. Your dad founded, that organization, which I'm sure was a huge sort of support system within all of this. But yeah, how did you sort of galvanize these efforts?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And, running a campaign was like a second full-time job, and even more, I think, intense than being on city council, because you have to try to convince people. It's like the longest job interview. You have to try to convince people to vote for you. And as a first-time candidate, I wanted to make sure that I put my best foot forward in every single aspect. And I was running for an open seat. And what I really wanted to do was make sure that anything that my opponent did, I did that better. So if it was yard signs, he put out 200, I put out 300. If it was, raising funds, we actually very fortunately broke the Redmond record for city council for funds raised, and it was by double. And we used all of that to pay a organized team, making sure that we had literature that was being sent out either by mail or door knocking. But it was really a lot of sleepless nights of just making sure that we were getting the work done. And there's a whole list of things that you have to check off to be a successful candidate. And, I sought endorsements from labor organizations and, the business community, elected officials. One of them was the Attorney General of Washington State, Bob Ferguson, who is now running for governor. And he actually fought Trump's Muslim ban a few years back and won. And so, elected officials who were really influential, making sure that I got to have their support behind the campaign. And then, at the end of the day, you mentioned as part of the question, field organizing. That was what really made the difference. Our campaign knocked on over 8,000 doors. I personally knocked on over 2,000. I even sprained my ankle and just kept continuing to walk because I wanted to make sure that, I didn't do anything that could, I would regret later on, where, what if one door would have made the difference? Because in a lot of communities, one door does make the difference. And so that was really organized by, my campaign team, making sure that the facets of organizing were just all set in place. But the youth volunteers that we had a huge youth engagement program as part of the campaign. And I had a couple dozen youth volunteers who were out there knocking on doors. My younger brother, he was 13 then. He was, knocking on hundreds of doors just across the street from me, and getting him involved early on was just something that, I was proud of myself. And then having all of the other youth and, at the end of the day, galvanizing the youth is really critical to be able to just have that momentum moving forward, for not just for my own campaign, but for their lives, and having them be the next generation of leaders. And at the end of the day, I was very, very fortunate to earn over 72% of the vote. So it all helped. So I'm really proud of, the work that the entire team put in, and the entire community who was just behind me from day one.
Amazing. And I want to use this moment to give a brief shout out to Osman, because he was involved with our 2020 campaign. So it's so wild to see that from that time, he was silently working in the background on all of this and putting in so much work. And now he's here speaking as an elected official. And so that is kind of the essence of what we want APF to be, is how do we kind of create a space where we can support individuals within our community to do this work, and then we can amplify them and showcase their work to the rest of the United States, right? And that's why we're here today. So this is super, super exciting to hear. Kind of the perfect, excuse me, transition to Umar. He does a lot of campaigning work, and I actually am a good friend of Umar's. I'm super excited to sort of see you here today. You recently graduated from undergrad and have sort of jump-started your career in public service by successfully managing Democratic campaign efforts, and recently began a role in the Illinois House of Reps. And so would love to sort of hear what networks and internship experiences were most useful to you to get where you are now.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely am a firm believer in the fact that all experiences are incredibly valuable. I know people sometimes will say, like people have some reservations about like, this doesn't sound as prestigious. But I think that as long as you're actually meaningfully applying yourself and trying to gain something out of it, or at least like with your full heart, like actually trying to make a difference or better, then those experiences are valuable. With that being said, now I'm just going to blatantly say I think that my local and state government experiences have been the most impactful. And the reason I say that is because with the smaller scale operations, you tend to have a higher scope of responsibility. You have a lot more access to the candidate or the elected official. So on the ground with the candidate, oftentimes on smaller scale stuff, like even when I was in high school, I would have a candidate telling me, hey, can you prep me for this interview that I'm going on? And I'm like, I'm 16 years old, but I appreciate your faith in me. So I think that those opportunities are definitely something that people should capitalize on, and people also kind of tend to stray away from, namely because it's much cooler to like pursue the branding of some organization versus saying like, I worked with this local elected official. So I definitely think not overlooking or underestimating that, because then the magnitude and impact of the work that these people are doing too really does speak volumes, especially in a place like Chicago. A lot of my friends had no idea what the work of alderman even is. And I'm like, some of those giant skyscrapers in downtown Chicago comes down to this one person's office operation. So I definitely think that actually maximizing those opportunities, and the other benefit with these smaller scale operations is the exposure you get to community organizations, different unions, community leaders. It's just a very good opportunity to actually build and expand your network, because once someone becomes part of your network, more often than not, they'll tell you my network's your network. So you just keep on branching off. And I found that to be incredibly valuable. The other big network that I found to be beneficial is actually where I was introduced to Missile. It was a program similar to as APF has a few operations they do, the Muslim Public Affairs Council. They run their Congressional Leadership Development Program. So that functionally serves as an incubator for young Muslim talent that's looking to jumpstart a career in government and public service. So through this program, most of us were able to have legislative or executive agency internships, but then we also were provided with networking opportunities in different capacities. We met some world-renowned journalists. We were going to different executive departments and hearing from leaders of like Muslim leaders as well. So I definitely think that there's no shortage of programs like this that are available to young people and students. I know just within the Muslim community and Pakistani community, there's like a few organizations I could name off the top of my head, but also within government too. I know the federal congressional caucuses, they're always looking for like identity-based fellowships and programs. They reach out to a lot of universities and local orgs to siphon some of that young and diverse talent. And I guess I would also say just tapping into student resources. At least for me in my experience at U of I in Urbana-Champaign, the different newsletter subscriptions, the different job board access, the different job support and resources and guidance I had was also definitely something that helped me get connected with some of the right people.
Amazing. And we always love a MPAC shout out. We appreciate that. I guess I would say, and I'm sure this is a question that people our age don't really love to sort of answer. What do you hope for in terms of next steps in your career? Just because you're at a point where I feel like a lot of folks are at, and it would be very helpful to hear, what are you thinking and what sort of lessons have you learned within your current experiences that have maybe shifted your goal that you initially came into this field with?
Yeah, so I definitely think that to some degree, the point I'll raise, the other two panelists could speak to pretty well as well. But that's that the work of an elected official never really comes to an end. You take care of one thing, but your community is still going to continue changing. And that means that their needs are also going to change. So it's always an ongoing process. So for me, I think that there's also never really going to come a point when you're doing policy work, at least, where you've reached a limit, because there's always scope for growth and improvement. And I think that's kind of in the stage where I'm at right now too. So I think over the course of the next few years, I really hope, as we're working with different stakeholders as they're coming to the table, as we're working with our neighboring states on different like policy initiatives as well, just that I can kind of get a further develop my understanding of like policy analysis, actually how to draft legislation, and like really just flushing that out. But long term, I do know that like I have a long-standing interest in development, and particularly with relating to Pakistan. And I think that was also a key part of kind of what informed my long-term academic studies. Now, as I'm looking to pursue a master's in public policy, that's kind of why I took some time in between undergrad and going to graduate school, just so that based on my practical experiences, I could see how do I want to tailor and adjust my coursework to serve my long-term goals. Because I have the general, like, I want to say just policy analysis on like the domestic level, but then being able to actually like go on that more international level through my coursework is something that's really valuable. So I think taking the time to get practical experience, and then if you're looking to further your education, kind of evaluate your past experiences and what it is you're looking to do long term.
Amazing. Yeah, can agree with all of that. And I think a lot of this work is transferable. I mean, you guys have sort of touched within your respective positions so many policy areas, and you've had to put on all of these different hats. And so I think the expertise that you are building will definitely have a long-term impact in whatever field or position you take on next. My last question is for all of our panelists, and frankly, the most, I think, important one. We are once again somehow approaching a very polarized election where a lot of people within our community in particular, and as well as the Muslim American community, feel extremely disempowered and are simply not interested in voting. It's not an easy question, but would love to pose it to you is, what would you say to people that are on the fence? Why is voting so important in general, but also within this time and within this election? And more importantly, why is it so important within the local and state elections? And this, can pass to anyone, but feel free to sort of jump around.
I guess I can start with this one. So I would tell anyone and everyone that voting is important. I know every election season we hear people say this is the most critical election you can turn out in. And it's like, I wouldn't say it's this election, it is every election is a critical election. And I would tell them that every single vote truly does matter. And I would say that from my own personal experience, because I live in one of the collar suburbs of Chicago, and we were having a local trustee race where there was one South Asian candidate with a platform that was broadly reflective of the South Asian community that is in that suburb, versus a candidate that's playing into a lot more of those right-wing talking points that we've been hearing in recent years. So when it came down to it, the South Asian candidate did end up winning by a total of 7 votes. And I tell everyone those 7 votes make a difference when we're getting our zoning approved for them. We recently had opened a masjid within our community, and it would be a lot easier to get that through with a Muslim voice on our board of trustees, rather than someone that would probably raise concerns about the call to prayer and the impact that has on the community. So when it comes to our local individual impact, every single vote matters. And the second point I would raise is, having managed a race in the March primary this last cycle, voter turnout in Chicago was around 20%. That's the lowest it's been in 50 years. And people aren't coming out to one degree because they're largely disillusioned, but then that's also to their own detriment, because on the down ballot races and stuff that people typically don't want to pay much attention to, that's the one that tends to have the most direct impact on your day-to-day lives. This past cycle, there was a referendum on a wealth transfer tax that would then be used to address homelessness in the city of Chicago. And the results of that could have dramatically been skewed or different depending on what voter turnout had looked like if people were actually coming out. And then lastly, I'll just say that if you want your values reflected in your policy, you can't do that without making your voice be heard. It's like one singular vote alone can have that much of an impact. So imagine when we as a community collectively are encouraging our friends, families, and neighbors to also come out collectively. So I think it's very important to get registered, be informed, and make it to the ballot box.
I know we're running short on time, so I just want to absolutely echo what Umar said. You know, the most important thing that I've seen in being in office and getting involved locally is just the firsthand impact of policy and funding opportunities that, you know, can be seen very quickly at the local level, and having people, you know, get involved in their own communities will go a long way. You know, the two other panelists mentioned just very specifically the halal food legislation, and that can affect hundreds and thousands of people on a day-to-day basis where, you know, prior to getting involved, it just was not happening. And so I think at the end of the day, having our people, you know, at the table and making sure that we're as involved as can be, whether it's running for office or, you know, voting, at the end of the day, you have that voice and you have that opportunity. So very, very much so encouraging of all of those opportunities.
Yeah, I don't have much to add there with what was said. So thank you.
Amazing. I recognize we are short on time, so I want to flag that if any of the panelists, I know if you have a hard cutoff, no worries at all. Feel free to head out. But if anyone else does want to stay over, we would love to take at least one question from our participants, but no stress at all. Okay, so Khadija, if you want to sort of see if we have any questions, feel free to let us know, and then we'll pose it to our panel.
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Masal. So really quickly, I would like to give a shout out to the APF GoTV board lead, Mahmoud Panjwani. Thank you for joining us, and we can take one question. So Maha asks, what kind of hurdles have you faced as an elected official in the US with a Pakistani identity, and do policy interests ever clash with personal stakes?
I'll just jump in. You know, I think there's been various, I think, just microaggressions that I've faced. I think running for office as a person of color and then as a woman, there's just so many added layers. And so I think whether that's been questions about like, where are you really from, to, you know, like Siddiqui, like, are you related to, you know, that terrorist I saw in the news, like just some ignorant stuff you just hear about running for office. I think it's par for the course, unfortunately. I think it hasn't bothered me. I think when I became the first Muslim mayor, there were, you know, again, some of those tropes that came up, but it hasn't, I think it's been one of those things that as with time has gone on, each election, there's been less of some of that. And I'm so sorry, I have a hearing right now, so I gotta run, but great to be with all of you, and thanks so much for hosting this.
Thank you. We really appreciate your time.
Bye.
Bye. On that note, I want to thank all of you, one, for submitting those questions to our participants, but also our panelists for providing such an enriching discussion. I think you've all pointed out so many, like issue areas that you've been able to touch, important points as it relates to our election, but more broadly, why we should be supporting Pakistani-Americans and people of color that are running in local and state elections. And so we look forward to staying in touch. We will be supporting you from the sidelines however we can. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone for joining. I want to use this time very, very quickly to have Khadija shout out our upcoming work that we have and our pledge to vote. Essentially, our pledge to vote, as I've mentioned, is a way for us to have Pakistani Americans across the United States, but more importantly in swing states, identify that they are in fact going to vote in the upcoming elections. So highly encourage you to share this with family and friends as a way to motivate them and get a conversation started on why elections and voting are so essential to our community. But thank you all so much for joining, and we hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes.